welcome. So my name is Daniel. I am the founder of the Good Growth Company, also a marketing advisor and a brand strategist working with nonprofits. Super excited to have our special guest here today. We are going to dive right into our introduction. So firstly, I will turn it over to you to say a little bit about who you are, what you do, for those who are unfamiliar. Hopefully you looked into the bio, of course, when registering, but it's always great to hear how you like to describe yourself. So
sure. So my name is Stachen Lett-Frederick. I would characterize myself as a community leader, a youth worker at heart. I am the current president and CEO of Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Toronto. Prior to that, for 8 years, I was the executive director of a youth center that I scaled from being simply in the York Southwestern area of Toronto. So if you're familiar with Toronto, it's in the northwest of the city, but scaled it across the city through a $7 million grant from the government, as well as scaled it nationally through some other grants. I'm also the founder of BrAIDS for AIDS, which is an international organization that raises awareness around HIV/AIDS in the African, Caribbean, and Black communities in Canada and internationally through a culturally relevant practice of hair braiding. And if I didn't think that was enough, I do consultancy, and I am the proud mama of a little dynamic 3-year-old, or soon to be 3-year-old.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love the description of your 3-year-old being dynamic. I haven't heard that before for a kid. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. And as people continue to introduce themselves, super happy to have you here and talk about your experience, which is very broad. And I love that you kind of have experience both on the grassroots level as well as working with larger organizations. We have quite a few questions to go through that were submitted. So we'll dive right into those. And if anything comes up in the chat, feel free to, to interact or let us know. So starting from the beginning, I think a lot of our attendees here want to know. We have actually attendees who work for national organizations that join from across the country, but we also have a lot of individuals who are really grassroots and starting up their own. So, what are the conditions like now for someone who is starting a nonprofit? If you could speak a little bit about that, and what are some of the first steps that you would share if you were to start today?
Yeah. So, regardless of whether you are starting up a not-for-profit or you are in a large organization, medium-sized organizations, the external community is the same. In that, the not-for-profit sector is facing several challenges. There have been challenges in terms of funding. We know there's things around inflation. The price for things that you would have normally bought in your not-for-profit organization is now higher. So when you look at sort of the expenses line item, it is very high. But then when you look into the revenue aspect, that has also been challenging because much of the funding in the sector, there's government grants, there is grants from corporations, and corporations are also facing quite a lot of challenges in terms of raising revenue, which then impacts the money that they are able to give to charities. So you're seeing a decrease in revenue, but a rise in expenses. The other thing that a lot of organizations have seen as a result of the pandemic is a decrease in volunteerism. Now, you may have had people being involved in sort of the food distribution. So people saw a rise in sort of the interest in volunteering around food distribution, but some of the other areas has seen a decrease. So a lot of not-for-profits that have relied on volunteers to do the work have seen a decrease in some of those areas. So in that question that was posed around whether or not looking at ventures, looking at starting up, I say it is important to understand what is your unique value proposition. If you are duplicating resources or duplicating the service that exist within a local space, I would say maybe you want to look at merging, you want to look at partnerships, as opposed to just going on your own. We really want to see organizations creating new and different ideas to addressing community issues rather than the same thing over and over. So really sort of identifying what makes you different before starting out a new not-for-profit.
Makes sense. And obviously there's a lot of very well-intentioned individuals who are passionate about making an impact, and they see problems they want to solve, but you would probably recommend that they, look at the existing organizations
infrastructure in the community before deciding to create, because it takes work running a not-for-profit, whereas you can merge resources by looking at merging or working within an organization.
Absolutely. Okay. That being said, when we talk about, the fundraising situation, we're both, looking for individual donations and for government grants. What have you been seeing, and what do you kind of recommend for those who are starting from scratch? And I know that, like you mentioned, we're in a different time now, but it would also be great to hear what you did starting up, if you were kind of like fully bootstrapped, and what you did when you started your organization.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is important in the not-for-profit sector is to have people to support you in the work. And so I can talk about some opportunities that exist that I sort of looked at, not just the typical funding, which is, writing a big grant application and getting funding. What I utilize when coming in, for example, at Frontline. So even though Frontlines was an organization that that was established way before I came in, it was about a 30-year-old organization. It was one that I would say operated like a 5-year-old organization. And so there was only 3 staff, including myself. And when I left it back in October, it was then a staff of 27. So really grew. But what I initially did was access some of the local subsidies for hiring. That it's through organizations such as the YMCAs that provide subsidies, those local employment agencies that provide subsidies for hiring on people. So that would allow that my attention wouldn't be on the day-to-day operations of the organization, because I could use those subsidies, whether those subsidies allow me to hire somebody on for 2 months, 3 months, so they can focus on the operations, that I could spend my time in terms of the fundraising pieces, the larger grants pieces that I could spend my time on. What my strategy was really looking at those funders that had open calls of funding. So typically places such as, and I'm going to talk about just sort of my local reality. So much of the federal or provincial grants or city grants, it's only certain timelines. It's every March, it's every May, that this funding cycle. But there's some organizations, particularly corporations, that have open cycles of funding. And even some of the family foundations, they have open calls of funding where they're just receiving applications on a regular basis. And so I tapped into those where I could get money into the door right away, and then be able to look at much more long-term types of funding.
Right, because sometimes the funding cycles are not available till the following year. You could have missed this year's deadline, and then you're stuck in between.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
Makes sense, absolutely. And did you have the support for those on our call who are looking to fundraise themselves and apply for grants? Did you have were there partnerships? Did you have the support of your board for those who are applying for the first time for funding? Is it more of a collaborative effort? What would you recommend?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate that I had a board that just allowed me to be and to go after whatever I saw the need of. And they said, however you needed my support. And so I just engaged them, not because I needed to, but I felt it important in part of a relationship building. I'm very big on relationship building. The good thing about our the board, not to the same extent of the board that I have currently, they were very committed and very connected as well. So it allowed for me to get access into doors where I could just do quick presentations and funding was readily available. So look for board members. If you're looking at recruiting board members, look for board members that have connections in businesses. You want to have community board members, people who understand the local issues, but you also want to have people that have connections into businesses that can make those introductions and can get funding easily.
That makes a big difference too. Yeah, your board should kind of, not just be an extension of your existing team, but they should be in different communities and be able to be tapped in as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
That can make a big difference especially for a newer grassroots group, right?
Absolutely.
So one of the themes that we want to talk about today is, the idea of capacity and burnout, right? Especially with leaders in the nonprofit space. Now, you're someone who has clearly had multiple roles at any given time. I've watched you, over the years with your own organizations, being on the board. How do you recommend someone balance their kind of energy and output for all these, amazing causes that they're passionate about?
Yeah. I think I would say for me that I did not realize that I was burnt out only after the pandemic.
Okay.
And I say I truly love what I do. So work does not feel like work for me. It's actually my enjoyment about being out in community, seeing kids get their hair braided. I've gone into a prison with young men. And as strange as it sounds, that encounter fueled me. And so while it's this unique dynamic of here, I see these young people like suffering. It gave me that energy to do the work more, and so I'm really fueled by passion. But I would say this: now it was only after the pandemic, because the pandemic was thing. So on a normal levels, I could have been handling all those things: braids for AIDS, ED of Frontlines. I was also teaching at Sheridan College, and I was doing my MBA in 2020. And then the pandemic happened. And so then there was now increased capacity of everything that I was doing. And at that point, then I realized I needed to pass on the rein. But I strongly encourage self-care. I currently, I do not work on Sundays. I've made that a choice as of last year that I don't, I don't do any work on Sundays so that I can be refreshed and come back with a new mindset. So that's I do encourage that for all of us to take that time for yourself.
That's so important. And it's hard again when you're super passionate, but you can't serve others if you yourself are incapacitated.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Now, when it comes to, so that's a great comment on balance, and thank you for sharing your experiences. When it comes to how to balance things like the bigger picture strategic vision with the day-to-day operations, how do you go about that, or what do you recommend?
So I might use this term logic model. When people ask me, how do you manage the day-to-day operations with your strategic vision? It should be that your day-to-day operations fuels your strategic vision and mission. If you're doing things that don't fuel that, there's no point of you doing it, right? So if your mission is to address the pressing needs of children and youth, if your needs is around, or your mission is around scaling into a new community, that's part of your strategic plan, then your day-to-day operation should be leading towards that. And that's when you talk about your logic model or your work plan or whatever you're doing, that should be part of your strategic vision. And so when things don't work, for example, if you're having a challenge in whatever you're doing, you can always look to your North Star, which is your vision, your strategic plan, to say, I'm going to do this, because it should be closely tied in. Right.
So those day-to-day tasks shouldn't kind of take you away from your vision. It should all be working towards that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. From a decision perspective, you might be, as a leader, you might be faced with decisions that are, very, very small and not necessarily consequential to the bigger picture. So how do you kind of handle that in any given day? What should we post on social media versus which partnership should we pursue next? For you, is it kind of all just blend together?
That's a great question. What I utilize is it helping to meet the vision of the organization?
Right.
So a great piece. I've had a relationship with a group who has reached out to us for us to be part of an event. In the grand scheme of things, if people to just look at it at a surface level, they would say, why are we doing this? Because it's probably not meeting what individuals will think is part of our strategic vision. But I have something deeper that I want out of that relationship.
Right.
With that partnering organization. So I'm willing to do this one thing as part of my long-term goal with that organization and getting what we need out of it. So,
got it. So at the end of the day, it still contributes to the bigger picture.
Now I'm in a much larger organization. When I was at a very smaller organization or even with an organization with less staffing, yes, there were things that missed out from our strategic vision. Like, for example, the door is broken or there's a plumbing issue, right? These things happen and it has to be addressed. And that's why I think I shared in the beginning is that I made sure and find resources to hire people to deal with those things so that I can focus on those strategic things. But it does matter. You want to ensure that the space and environment that you have for the young people are conducive to their learning. You don't want a broken door. You don't want a toilet not working for those young people.
Right.
But I should not be, having my time spent on those things.
Absolutely. So you got to delegate that responsibility so that you can focus on the bigger picture. Absolutely. On a related note, we wanted to talk a little bit about teams. There was a question about how do you approach, building a strong organizational culture, especially in a youth-focused organization.
That's a great question. I think when you building cultures around the values that you aspire to, it is very strange for me to be part of an organization that values young people and within the organization don't hire young people. I think it's weird, right? How can I go and advocate for youth or tell people to go employ youth,
right,
and then yourself are not employing young people? And then the same sort of framework of having, youth voices. So, creating a culture where voice and people's feedback resonates throughout an organization. That shouldn't just even be about a youth organization. But if you're in this sector, you have to have a love for humanity. And in having a love for humanity is making sure that your culture is humane.
Right.
Even when you have to make the tough decisions such as laying off people, terminating people, all those pieces that you have to walk with the values that you would say for your clients. Because just know that if you, for example, terminate somebody, they may end up as a client of yours. People are living one paycheck away from being poor. And this is even people who work in this sector. And so, it's everybody that you treat with care, and that's the values that you put into an organization.
Absolutely. And those relationships, like you said, you could end up working with them in the future. They could be working for another organization that you're trying to partner with.
Yes.
So you want to always maintain that as much as you can. Did you have a lot of experience working remotely? Do you still work remotely, or are you kind of full-time in person?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the organization that I was at before, I mean, the name of the organization is Frontlines. There's no,
Right.
there's
Of course.
no backlash.
You were there in person, of
right?
course.
So, but with the current organization that I am at now, much of my staff virtually, there are some opportunities for us to be in office, and I want to explore those particular pieces of people being in office, because there is that greatness of being able to turn to somebody's in the next office and just have a quick conversation, as opposed to having to let's book a meeting, and it takes up a bit of time. So there's opportunities for us to look at those pieces around which, and I am also a person big on equity. So in the other organization that I was running before leaving in October, you had some administrative staff, and you had some staff that was, let's say, in the kitchen cooking for things.
Yeah.
And I felt it was unfair for me to have those staff being there full time and others not being there. So looking at those pieces of equity.
Makes sense. Absolutely. And that has to do with the previous point you made about the company culture, right? And the organizational culture, and having people all aligned on that.
Everything.
Yes, that makes sense. Now, when it comes to collaborating with external organizations, so partnering with other nonprofits, charities, perhaps, funders and sponsors, what do you look for in a good partner? And do you have any tips for people who are looking to collaborate?
Yeah. So I would say, is there an alignment? And that is key, particularly when you're dealing with funders. That's a question that they even ask you. How are we aligned? What are the things that are you doing? What are you proposing that's in alignment with us? So you want to look for alignment in terms of what you're trying to do, but key and important, how you're trying to do it. Because there's some people who could be bulldozers, and that's not the way that I work. I am a little bit more strategic in my approaches to things around, again, relationship building. So one partner might want to be like, well, we're just going to go do this. And I'll be like, no, we want to hear from the community, because if you don't get buy-in for the community, you're going to end up with risk. Some would be that, your idea of what you're thinking is just not of interest to the community, and they don't show up. And that will pose a risk to your funding arrangements. Right. If you tell your funder you're going to be serving 20 youth, and because you think that this is just a total, not cool idea, they're not going to show up, right? So really being on the ground, talking to young people. So even myself, as now the CEO of this organization, 110 plus organization, this week I'm actually going out to schools to meet with the young people, right? So I can hear what the young people say. I won't be, doing any instruction or facilitating of the program, but just being there so I could hear them. And so, being accessible to the community. Of course, you want to have barriers in that you don't want community members, for example, thinking that they could override and come to you directly and miss the staff that are there to do this piece. But you want to ensure that you can hear from the community and make sure that it's curated the way that you want it to be created. So that would be a next step in terms of ensuring that it's not what you're planning to do, the alignment, not what, but then how you plan to do it, and that you have clear expectations of what you want communication to look like between partners.
Right.
What are the key evaluation that you want to be getting from these young people? I remember having a funding agreement with a funder, and they wanted me to ask the youth in prison questions around, did this program help you with employment? And I'm like, I am not asking these young people these questions, because it was a survey that was just a blanket survey. And so it had some sections around health, some around education, employment, etc. And I'm like, if I was to give these young people this questionnaire, this will create trauma feelings of inadequacy because they're seeing employment and that will have them thinking, oh, I'm in prison, I'm not getting out, all those different pieces. So I'm not doing it. And that could have impacted a $92,000 grant that I had from that funder, but I was willing. I told them, take back your money. And then they came back and like, oh, no, Stachen, we won't take back your money and whatnot. But I was that clear that I was not going to. So I think what is sometimes clear upfront is like, what evaluation information that you want to get out of this, and do I feel willing enough to be part of this?
Right.
So.
And it's like you said, you're leading with your values, so that sounds like it doesn't get compromised no matter what the situation is.
No, you will realize that about me. I don't bend when it comes to my values.
That makes sense. Yeah. I love that. So we'll switch to talk a little bit more about community building and engagement, keeping your community engaged. One of the questions that was submitted was, how can nonprofits engage younger donors, supporters? How do we get involved? How do we connect with the younger generation? That was the question.
Yeah. Do not think that at any level that you are not able to go to the young people. So the same as myself, as I shared, I'm going out to meet with young people.
Right.
So to ask that question is, first of all, just go. Just whether they're on the basketball court, whether they're at the malls, think about where young people are and go to them and get information out of them. So, I also read, and so one of the reports that I'm reading, and this is particularly from a donor perspective, is, how to engage young people in becoming donors. Well, where are the young people? So it's, again, thinking about where they are and what can we do to get them in that. Again, it's asking you to set up a youth sort of survey or a youth focus group. Make sure you have food if you want them to come out. If you can get gift certificates or anything like that for them, for their participation in that. I'm also big on paying young people. So even for volunteering, like if it's an honorarium, give them some sort of incentive for them to be involved with you. So if you even have a young person in your immediate circle, just ask them the question, what do you think? If you see a young person at the bus, say, hey, can I ask you a question? Like, I don't know. I just have really, I have no barriers or no ego to say, I'm going to talk to a young person.
That's so important. I think you have an advantage as well because you started in this community, started working in the nonprofit space as a young person yourself.
Yes.
But it's also great to stay engaged. It sounds like you're not afraid to go directly. I think sometimes I've seen this too, working with organizations where there's kind of a barrier. They're in their office and they are trying to advertise to young people, whether it's to volunteer or to participate in their programs, but they're using their own language.
Yes.
Right. So I think from a communications and marketing perspective as well, besides getting that direct feedback is, try to tailor your messaging, more accurately to the audience.
And language, as you said, language is important. Instagram is important, right? Like utilizing the right hashtags, like those are those things. Listen to cues. Sometimes I have to ask, like, what do you mean by that? When call me a fam, I said, what? What am I? Yeah. But, again, hearing their language, it allows you to know how to target them.
A related question that we got was around events. So how do you what's your tips on how to engage the local community to come out in person to events? Some organizations are amazing at this and they do it regularly, but for others, it's a big stretch to get people to show up in person. So what's your thoughts or tips on that?
I think create your following before the event.
Right.
Right? Like you want to have people buy into your mission and all that you're doing prior to the event. People want you to tell them what is the problem so that they can respond to it. Because, just saying, and I'll give an example. We have a big event, which you actually mentioned.
I just registered.
Awesome. Which is around an event where we are encouraging the community, particularly Black community, to step up to support youth in mentoring. Because there is a huge wait list. There's over 250, Black and mixed race youth who are looking for a mentor. And so sometimes you just need to tell people that this is a problem that you're having, and then the community can respond. But if you just put up a nice poster and there's no context, what is your real need? Why do you need me here? Why? And so I think it's just, I am one of those type of grassroots type of people. I'm like, I'm telling people straight up, this is the problem. This is how I need you to help me.
Right. Absolutely. You're making it a very clear way for people to engage. And also, I think the way I found out about that event was someone else had shared it on LinkedIn. So having people that are your ambassadors, I think it was one of the board members.
Absolutely.
Right. So
exactly.
It shouldn't just come from the organization. I think you should also use your team members and your volunteers and board members to promote these things, right? Okay. I think this is another interesting piece about building belonging. Can you speak at all to that? Building belonging, whether in the city, professionally or personally. So maybe perhaps someone who's working in a new community or a new area in the sector. Yeah. How do you build that belonging?
So is it belonging amongst clients or yourself feeling that you belong?
I think it was about kind of, so for example, I think the context here is someone who's, let's say that I get hired to work at a nonprofit in, I don't know, Georgetown. I'm not necessarily, I'm an outsider to Georgetown. Yes. So how do I kind of, build that belonging, not maybe for yourself, but also for the people you're trying to engage?
Yeah. So I would say is, again, getting to know the community by going out in community. When there's this thing called like asset mapping or like community asset mapping. So kind of understanding what are the places in that community, who are the key stakeholders, making a way to introduce yourself going out. I saw a question which I found which was the cutest, which is I'm a community loving introvert.
Yes, I saw that question.
Yeah, that doesn't doing all those typical things of networking and public speaking and whatnot. And I would say is you need to be that, right? But I, as much as people don't know, I am actually an introvert.
Okay.
I am an introvert. I don't like too much big crowds in terms of trying to engage in being that life of the party. That's not me. But what I do, I'm very strategic. Sometimes I look at who's going to be at a particular event.
Yep.
And I make sure and I just go meet that person. I usually stay to the left back of a thing. Like I actually know myself. Left back at a space, I probably find one person to connect with.
Okay.
And I make sure that relationship is quality. Right? So I'm very strategic. Everything that I do is very, very strategic. So you need to be able to go and network. But like I said, it's just probably find one person. There's always going to be one person who's standing by themselves. It's just not only going to be you. So find that person in the room. So that's my strategy. The second thing I would say, like if it's around public speaking, again, I'm not a big public speaker in the sense that like, I would do it. I've had great success in doing it, but usually I'll just come out and then I'll leave right after. That's typically how I operate. Because I can't do with too much of the engagement.
Right.
So that's, but you have to do it. Also, too, I would say is be a thought leader of a topic. So if it's to post on social media around something, if a particular person in that particular community that you have an interest in, repost their stuff, right? And then they might go and say, oh, who is this person who has reposted my stuff, right? So you do all those little things to, get people knowing about who you are. But it is something that's important. When you're looking at belonging in a community, it's all about connections. Humanity is around connection. So you have to make those connections. And that's the same thing for the people that you're serving. If you're talking about making people feel like they belong, help them build connections. help them be at tables and spaces that they would never think that they would be at. So many years ago, and this would be, I would say, probably 15 years ago, when I was a caseworker, a case manager, and I was working with a group of young people. I also created like this group for young girls. And then I reached out to Jean Augustine, which is the first Black woman in Parliament. And she decided to come out and meet my girls. I took the young girls out for dinner and they met Jean. And they also had met now Senator Paulette Sr.
Amazing.
As well at a different time. So again, giving your community members access to people. Like there's no sense that I have this wide network of people and it doesn't serve my community in the best ways.
You want to leverage them for sure.
Yeah.
Someone asked an interesting question on that whole collaboration and community piece, which was, what role has reciprocal collaboration played in your success? And you did mention that everything you do is strategic. So I'd love to know how people can learn from this.
Absolutely. So as I made mention, there's a group that reached out to do an event with us. It is not necessarily within our strategic, in our right now priorities.
Right.
But I know that it will. Right. And it's important to have those. You do something for me, I do something for you. It could be either in two separate events or two separate projects. But let people know I'm also very transparent. Like I tell people, so this is what I want out of the event. You're doing this in my space. I want to be able to speak to your audience.
Right.
Because it will lead to volunteer recruitment.
Right.
Right. So all those things, no matter what I do, I'm strategic in what I'm doing.
That makes sense. And and it's not always about, sponsorship dollars or contributing budget towards something. There's other ways that you can benefit from each other's events, right?
And I mean, this Big Brothers Big Sisters has a brand. Like it's a well-known brand. It's 110 years old. But this organization that has reached out has a brand that is well known within the Black community, and I'm well known in the Black community as well, but they have a huge also corporate following. So when our logo goes on that flyer, it says what it says.
There you go.
They need space, I'll give you space. Not a problem.
It's great. I love that. I love how that question was worded about reciprocal collaboration, because that truly you have to think with that in mind. If you can do anything once, but if you want to build a sustainable relationship or partnership, both parties need to be feeling like they're getting something out of that as well. Now there was a related question on the collaboration side, which is how do we leverage collective vision within individual and collaborative organizations to make the most impact and engage the most people? So again, another big question about big picture collaboration. Perhaps, at the beginning you talked about cautioning people from starting an organization.
Yes.
If there's already a lot of players in that space. So how do we talk about that collective vision?
Yeah, I think that word has been beyond collective vision. Collective impact has would be utilized. So, look for organizations that are doing similar things, right? It is connecting with those organizations and having those deep systemic conversations of what you're looking at achieving, what are we aligned on, how best can we pool our resources, whether human, financial, connections, whatever it might be, that we are making the most impact for the people that we're serving.
Yeah, stakeholders.
So I think it's that sort of like, again, asset mapping. So there's asset mapping of community, but there's asset mapping of organizations, of what do you bring, what do I bring, and then how we can work together to ensuring that we're driving change for the people that we serve. I think, again, those North Star pieces are key in what you should be working on.
I love that. Now let's talk about some of the challenges and setbacks, which is obviously an issue in any organization, but when it comes to the nonprofit sector, especially, and we're seeing all these stats about the need increasing, donations not keeping up with demand. So How have you kind of dealt with setbacks in general across any of the organizations that you've been in part of? How do you approach setbacks?
How do I deal with setbacks? So one is just understanding, is this an organizational issue or is this a sector issue? Right. So, what is within my control and what is not in my control. So I think is that understanding pieces. Of course, there's things in the, economy. So again, there is pieces around donations that are dwindling, right? So then what can we do as an organization? Now you said, not necessarily specific, but then I'm just using this as an example. Where the untapped spaces that we are seeing in areas. So that is really what you have to do is when you see that there's setback is, well, there's this the sort of quote of, if you're doing the same thing and expecting the same results, then it's insanity, right?
Yeah.
So we have a bunch
doing
of
doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So I think we have a bunch of crazy people in the not-for-profit sector. But so it is thinking about what can you be doing differently and challenging the status quo. So again, if volunteerism is on the decrease for an organization, well, what is it within your organization that is making volunteer challenges? So you might have that sector issue, but for me is it the number of hours that we're expecting people to volunteer with us because this is a standard format? It must be 2 hours a week. No, so can we change that to 1 hour a week?
Right.
Can we provide people with honorariums? Right. So it's taking all those particular challenges that you have. So if it's funding, okay, it's a challenge. And then asking the why. And I want to say that I ask the why to everybody.
Okay.
So if I get a funder who tells me, no, I'm reaching out and saying why. Now, my success rate in grant writing has changed significantly, that it's a much high, sort of success rate. But in the beginning, it wasn't that. And I asked the question, why? So one funder told me I was the only organization out of 50 applications that sent an email and asked them why. And as a result of that, I ended up getting funding from that individual when they moved to a different.
Amazing.
So asking the why, not just to your staff or whatnot, right, is just asking people why. And then if you hear why, then respond accordingly.
Absolutely.
So again, a lot of our community members have said that volunteerism is a luxury when they're trying to survive in this economic crisis. Well, can we pay them? It's a simple it's a simple thing.
What does that look like? Yeah, finding those solutions and asking what would work.
Yes.
If this is not going to work, what would work? And I think that's also important for innovation, because if you're just going around trying the same thing over and over and duplicating what other organizations have done, there's a lot you can do to customize that to see what would work for you in your community.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of communities are unique where, perhaps it wouldn't work there, but it would work here.
Absolutely.
Right? Amazing. So I really like that answer to help you innovate and ask why. So we have a few questions that are specific to your kind of role and your not your role, specific to people's roles. Because we talked a lot about how can you lead and lead. We talk about building from the ground up. Right. In this case, someone is saying they're the first person working in a development role at their organization. So if you were in their shoes, how would you prioritize your first 90 days, the first 3 months in a development role?
Yeah, so I would start asking questions, the why to your stakeholders, and the what. So what do people want? What do people need? Why have you given? Why haven't you not given? Those are some of the things that I would say. Figure out what is, again, your value proposition, because there's so many different not-for-profits and charities, and everybody wants to do the same, thing. They want to, everybody loves youth and they want to support youths, whether it's the environment, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of people that's doing similar things. So what is going to make you different? What are you being innovative about? So identify those particular pieces. Then the other piece I would say is then identifying the different programs and services that you have in your organization and what are the areas that those programs are trying to address.
Right.
And the reason why you would do that is that piece around alignment. Because funders there's some issue that they are interested in. And so you want to understand, is there an alignment to this? So if I, for example, use an issue around food insecurity. So if you have, let's say, a program that is providing meals to the community, well, you could be applying to this particular funder because it's food insecurity. But that same program could be a program that you are pitching to, let's say, RBC, whose focus is on youth employment and workforce development. Because in that program where you're preparing meals, you're training young people of how to prepare meals. So look at all your programs and see where the different areas of focus within that particular program or service, so that you could tap into the money for the same program, but a different funder talking about different sort of outcomes to that.
That's really valuable. That makes a lot of sense. And perhaps because you're coming into this role new, you have that fresh perspective. Yes. You're not seeing the programs and the organization the way that everyone else has for so long,
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, another question from a career perspective. How do you encourage groups to participate in community collectives that discuss culturally sensitive issues?
Yeah, make it fun. So HIV/AIDS is a big topic, a topic that is highly stigmatized and is not talked about a lot in terms of sex and sexuality. And so I paired it with braiding hair. Right. So people come to get their hair braided, and then you get them talking about, a concept around HIV/AIDS, right? And sometimes, again, it's not about just HIV/AIDS, but it's the social determinants of health that lead up to HIV, people, sort of contracting HIV. So really look at drawing people through something else that is not so intrusive, and it's fun, and so that you could have people. And food is a great way of bringing people together. So if it's cooking, so much of the programs that I used to have before, it's getting people in the kitchen, cooking, learning something new, and then sitting down and having that meal and having a conversation around it, right? So whether it's around mental health, again, that's not something that some communities don't talk about. Yeah. But I would say, again, ask communities, what would be, how do you think that we can engage you, your family, others through this, because we have this topic that we want to talk about and hear from people. But make it fun. Probably lead with some root causes of things rather about the issue itself. So it makes it more palatable for people. And then again, ask the community.
And if you're not someone who's a member of that community that you're trying to work with or serve, would you recommend kind of bringing in other people to collaborate with?
Absolutely. And, there are pros and cons to it, because sometimes people feel that, by speaking to a member of my community, this might go back to somebody within my community, right? So there's some fears around that sort of community ambassador.
People hearing about it.
Exactly.
Right.
But I would say is that, lead from that piece of humanity, right? Like if you genuinely want to learn. A lot of the women that I worked with much early of my career was South Asian women that was at my desk, looking for me to support them with different issues. And then I realized it was a trend. Like, I'm hearing this from this woman, this South Asian woman. By the way, I used to get the best biryani that I could get when I was working in one community. And so, I brought them all together, like, listen, like, this is what I was hearing, and like, I want us to chat about it. But then again, a lot of them would not, when it came to that group setting, many of them didn't speak about their individual issues because they didn't want it to see that I was dealing with those issues. But it was good as just a starting point for people to come together and talk.
Makes sense. You have to make people feel comfortable and welcome before they'll have meaningful dialogue, right?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit more. The last section of this chat, we'll talk about, your experience and your journey as well. And I want you to be able to share a little bit about, where you're at now and what you're focusing on. But just in case, for anyone who's attending, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, we have tons of questions that were submitted, but I love to just give the opportunity to anyone to also ask an additional question in the chat. Perhaps you didn't submit, or perhaps something that was shared may have sparked something. So feel free in the chat to ask any questions that you have. For the last 5 minutes, we'll see if we can address at least one of those questions. But in the meantime, let's get back to your story. What initially inspired you to get involved in the nonprofit sector in the first place?
Yeah, I always knew that I wanted to work with kids.
Okay.
From the young age of 8, I told my mom while I was living in Trinidad and Tobago that I wanted to travel internationally and I wanted to help young people. Being very smart, I was pushed into the sciences to go to med school. So I actually got a scholarship for chemistry. I was going to go on to med school after and then specialize in child psychiatry.
Okay.
But I fell in love with psychology and, started up a few organizations in Ottawa. And then that kind of led down to my part. I got an award for Community Development Award, and then it piqued my mind around community development. And then that just led my pathway now into where I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so because you started working more on the grassroots level, focusing on the issues, over time you've transitioned into leadership roles.
Yes.
Right? So for those people who are do you recommend that path, kind of getting your hands dirty first and then going into leadership? Someone did ask about how do I transition from a leader in another sector into a nonprofit sector?
Yeah.
Do you recommend? I mean, the whole title of this session is From the Ground Up. Right.
Yes.
But I would just love to hear your insights.
Yeah, I believe in kind of inserting yourself because you do get to know. If you so happen to be at your career point where you've gone one way and corporate, I've actually had a woman, reach out to me in regards to being at the corporate. And I said, even within corporations, there are corporate social responsibility offices. So you want to get perhaps involved there so that it will make you shift over to the not-for-profit if you're looking to, get a job into that, but really getting immersed into that. For me, I've always been a leader. And so that has always been a trait that has been within me. Okay. So that I knew leadership was going to be the part that I eventually go on to. To me, in terms of some of these skills, again, always being smart. So trying to make, the right decisions in businesses. But in 2020, after about, I would say 20 years of, being in the sector, or maybe then that would have been around 18 years in the sector. I decided to go do an MBA so that I would have the even more business acumen and the business language to have these conversations with corporations and very large individual givers. And I chose one of the best MBA schools in Canada. One for the curriculum, but two, the type of network I walked into a door with a potential major donor, and his response, so you're one of the Ivy crew. And so I knew that conversation was going to be easy with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. So as the new president and CEO of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Toronto, you started the role this past fall.
Yes.
What inspired you to join that organization? And other than you've always worked with youth, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what's kind of something you're most looking forward to?
Let me tell you. When I tell you I'm strategic about my life, I'm strategic about my life. In 2016, I was at the YMCA, and I saw myself I had a conversation with the CEO, the then CEO of the YMCA, and I told him that I wanted his job. And he said to me, Stachen, give me about 5 to 6 years.
Okay.
And I was like, that's not enough for me. And then I knew that was, him jokingly. I also had some conversations with some people in my circle, and they say that it more looks like a 15 to 20 year sort of trajectory to that. And I said, that is going to be too long for me. So I saw the opportunity with Frontlines at that time, much smaller organization, decided to lose my pension, sort of generating time, and take this grassroots organization such that within the next 7 to 8 years, when the role of Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Toronto comes up, or another organization, I would be in the right position because I would have scaled up Frontlines. I said that in 2016, and here I am, the president. So very strategic of what I do.
9 years later, you're here.
Yeah.
So what's one thing you're most excited about?
I am excited about getting people engaged in mentorship. Young people are so cool. All right. And it is a joy of being able to hear what a young person is doing, helping them to navigate their life challenges. So it's getting people excited about what I do every single day. In my first week or 2 weeks at Big Brothers, Big Sisters, a staff came up to me and asked me if I would mentor her. And that was the joy already, right? So it's getting people excited about mentorship and listening to young people on a much larger basis. Now, I was already moving in that space for Frontlines because I had scaled it across Toronto. But Big Brothers have a much larger brand, and we're already in 47 schools in Toronto. So it's just a little bit more access into institutions and spaces that I can make some true change for the youth of Toronto. So yeah.
That's so exciting and very aspirational for people who are looking to kind of really build and grow their career and their impact in the space. I know you have a hard stop. It's 1:00. Thank you so much, Stachen, for taking such great energy and time today to share your answers to some of these questions. For those of you who are looking to connect, of course, we'll make sure that you can look up Stachen on LinkedIn. She is quite active. Great example of someone who is being a thought leader and sharing their updates and sharing what they're up to. For future sessions, please feel free to join us. The Good Growth Company is hosting more sessions every Monday for the next few months. We have some sessions booked, so hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you once again, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for joining.